Hello, everybody. Today's review is going to be of a movie from 1978 called Faces of Death, which I finally did find on Tubi. So if you have Tubi, you can go and watch it there. I couldn't find it on Prime. It says it's available with AMC Plus, but I've searched for it high and low on there, and I can't find it anywhere. And I also have AMC Plus on Prime, so I'm a little bit confused as to why it's saying it's available there to watch, and it's not when you search it. But it is available on Tubi, and Tubi is completely free. It does have ads throughout the movie, so if you're not a big person with, or if you're not a fan of ads, I guess maybe don't go watch it. But also, definitely don't go watch it if you're a squeamish person, because this has a lot of graphic content in it. But it wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be. But it does kind of teach us a lesson about like the natures of death, I guess, and like this one character's following and like fascination with it. Because really, there is only one true cast member you ever see throughout the movie, and he was played by Michael Carr, uh, or yeah, Michael Carr, who played Dr. Francis B. Gross, who is the only one you ever actually see throughout the film, other than like all of the other random actors that are just kind of like backups, I guess, in the film that kind of perform all of these supposed to be, I guess, found footage or footage that he shot type deal things. So I did give this movie a 5 out of 10 because I feel like a lot of it was just kind of shock value. And I have seen it called like a mockumentary, so apparently a lot of this footage wasn't even real. Now, obviously, some of it was because they had like footage from like World War II and stuff. So, again, it's hard to say what in this film was actually legitimate and what was made out to be like a mockumentary. And like it's so hard to tell with these older films, right? Because uh, they didn't have the same type of like CGI and graphics we have today. So they had to use a lot of practical effects, obviously, in this movie to make it look as real as possible, right? So we start out with basically kind of like no story, just this really weird scene with this operation in it, and we're not really sure why. But then when we get to Dr. Gross's telling us about like his story of being plagued by the same dream of death with like this woman and this priest, and he just kind of, I guess, kept repeating it. So I guess that slowly, as he grew up, led him to his journey around the world to the many faces of death, which I suppose is kind of where the film got its name. So he starts out in Mexico, where he was studying like mummification, death by sports, and then he was studying like animal deaths, like that included like dog fighting and so on and so forth. So he definitely had some very interesting, I guess, like takes on certain things that he had seen, obviously, and yeah, he definitely did a deep dive into like almost everything when, I guess, like as far as like death goes when it comes to like animals and humans, and studying like the accident side of things, and just like uh, the abilities of humans and like how their brains work with certain things, including like religion, obviously. I guess his dreams were kind of like death related and religion related, so I suppose that's why maybe he did like dives into that as well throughout the movie. So we go into the Amazon jungle in South America, where he studies the animals and the tribes. And he does the same thing in Africa, where he studies one of the tribes known as the Messiah. Or the Messiah, maybe. I can't remember exactly how to pronounce that. I think it was the Messiah. Um, so yeah, he kind of studies like their survival tactics and so on and so forth. And in Africa, it seems that even though they kill the animals, they're doing it as like a, how did he word it exactly? It was more like a spiritual thing, I guess, for them, and it was like out of respect, I suppose. Kind of a weird way to look at it, but I guess that's kind of what they were doing it for. And obviously, you have to have respect for the animal if you're going to be consuming it, right? And then he talks about like farming in the Western world, and how obviously some farmers, do it like the old-fashioned way, where they're just kind of like on like a small farm, and all of the animals are killed by hand, and that makes it a little more personal, I guess, because you're killing it to kind of provide for yourself. And then, of course, he talks about like how we've slowly kind of gone into like the butchering side of things with like slaughterhouses and so on and so forth, obviously to up the amount that uh, human could do in one day, right? So, and I guess he says after this that what he's seen would make him want to become a vegetarian. Now, I still eat meat, and I will still eat meat after this movie. It's, um, I guess we kind of like become as a society kind of like desensitized to graphic things like this, and we're not even sure if all of it's real or what we're seeing in this movie, right? So, kind of hard to say what was real and what was not in this movie, but he does talk about not only farming but having like an interesting culinary experience in the Middle East with like monkey brains. And I'm not really sure if he himself consumed any. I don't remember if he ever touched on that, but he talked about like this, talking to this group of people that basically just beat the animal to death and then consume the brains. Yeah, so it was a weird, like, almost like a ritualistic type thing, I guess, over there. Um, and yeah, brains were like a delicacy over there too. So uh, yeah, very very weird. And then he kind of gets more into like the hunting side of things, and he talks about the three different types of hunters: the ones who do it for thrill, poachers, and then the ones who do it for sport, who are more in touch with like the nature side of things, and obviously have respect for the animal that they're killing. Like most hunters um, are doing it to provide for their families, right? So it makes sense. And then poachers, of course, are just doing it because it's more for the money side of things. And then I guess the people that do it for the thrill would be the ones that don't have any remorse or connection to nature or the animal. They're just doing it out of their own kind of, like, I guess it would be like a dopamine spike or like adrenaline spike essentially for them. Yeah, kind of a weird way to think about it, but yeah, yeah, I don't understand why you would just do it for like a thrill. And he then leads into like the killing of the seals in Alaska, which is definitely an inhumane practice, I would say for sure. Um, but also, it is done to provide for people as well, I suppose, in the end. So it might not be the most humane way to go about killing an animal, but it is, I guess, kind of like a necessity there. So I suppose, yeah, I guess you got to take the good with the bad there, in a sense. Um, and then he talks about his meeting with an assassin, Francois Jourdan, who was a French assassin, and I guess he's kind of talking about like the people who kill, uh, like have a reason for killing, or are, so in Jourdan's sense, I guess it would be like the money, right? Because he said he didn't do it for any political reason or like his own pleasure. It was more, he was making money off of these assassinations. So um, that's why he would do it. And then he talked about the people who kill for no reason, like the people who just kind of go off the rails. Now, I'm surprised he didn't touch much on like serial killers. He talked more about assassins and the people that just kind of go off the rails. And one particular one was a guy who I guess had killed his family. He talked about, and he did mention something about, oh yeah, that was just after this. So he talked about his time in a coronary office and the studying of autopsy and technological findings, obviously, that an autopsy may not be able to spot because the human eye can only do so much um, based on like injuries or disease or whatever you may have died from, like natural causes, if you were murdered, if you were, so on and so forth, right? So again, sometimes you have to take like tissue samples and dive deeper under like a microscope and so on and so forth to understand exactly what may have happened or may have been the cause of death for that person. So yeah, there was a lot of interesting stuff in this movie for sure that he touched on, and it was kind of like educational in a sense almost, even though some of it was quite gruesome. But yeah, it was kind of like his findings throughout his like 20-year journey, essentially, of being a doctor and kind of having this weird obsession or fascination with death. And then he talks about an inmate that was put on death row for crimes we will not talk about, and kind of like the inhumane side of that as well, because I suppose it's more kind of like if essentially they stopped doing the death penalty in a lot of places because of if somebody was falsely accused and put to death, then there was no real way to prove afterwards if the case was reopened and something ended up happening where they ended up offing the wrong person. And I know that obviously the death penalty is something that a lot of people agree with, and if the crime fits, I have to say, yeah. But also, in a sense, it's almost less suffering for that person that committed that, heinous crime than just to kind of slowly, live a life out in prison. But most people who commit certain crimes don't make it in prison anyway, from what I've heard, so I guess it doesn't really matter. Yeah, you're going to kind of meet your end depending on the crime you've committed anyhow, right? From what I've heard anyway. So he then goes into studies of religion and cults, which I wasn't surprised about because his dreams had, kind of like a religious tone to them, I guess, with the priest being in there. So he actually studied a cult that believed that immortality could be obtained or found through the organs of the dead, and I guess by consumption. And then they end up having like this weird gathering afterwards. I guess you'll have to watch the movie in order to understand what I'm talking about there. But anyway, maybe you can kind of read between the lines on that one. So yeah, obviously they're not going to achieve mortality through cannibalism, which is a weird way to go about it anyway. But then he talks about the complications, like he totally switches and then starts talking about like complications of suicide and how it was one of the most like bizarre or baffling ones that he couldn't really wrap his head around. And I guess if you weren't ever thinking about that kind of thing yourself, it would be a really hard one to even fathom why anybody would want to, take their own life, right? And then he talks about another way to look for immortality, which is like the cryogenic thing, being frozen and then I guess essentially being woken up at a later date. But also they take all the blood out of your body, so I'm not exactly sure how you would even be able to be woken up after that, because I would think that even though you were frozen, your body would start to deteriorate regardless, right, without any liquid in it, because our bodies are what, like 75% water, so I would think it would just kind of eventually just dry up, even if it was in ice. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe there's more to the science behind it, but yeah, I would think that eventually your body would, despite even being frozen, would start to deteriorate, because it's essentially like a form of mummification, which preserves the body for a lot longer period of time, but also the body still does deteriorate even in mummification. So yeah, kind of a weird thing to even think about, like if you had gone into like cryogenic freezing in like the 1970s when this movie was made, and then you end up being woken up like 100 years later, like, can you imagine just being like, well, just wake me up every 100 years, I'll just live for a year, and then just put me back in the freezer and just keep doing that same thing. That's basically basically you're making yourself immortal in a sense, but also you're only, living for so long out of the cryogenic freezing at a time, which would be a really weird thing. So you'd only get like life every 100 years. That seems so weird. And like it would all depend on how long you wanted to be out, right? Um, and then who's to say that you're even going to be able to get out? There could be complications in those 100 years with the cryogenic freezing. Like, who knows? I just feel like it's a lot to uh, wrap my head around as somebody who wouldn't even want to do that. Um, Maybe if there was another way to achieve immortality, that would be great. But yeah, I think freezing myself and then trying to wake myself up every 100 years, which just seems like a lot of stress on the people who are trying to keep me frozen, and a lot of stress on me too, because who knows what the outcome could be. So then he talks about death uh, through like war and the lives lost during, obviously. So like the serious outcomes for that, like how many people did we really lose? Which is interesting because I think it's more like, World War II was a pretty serious, definitely a serious one for sure. And lives were lost. So many lives were lost on all sides. So yeah, it's a tragedy no matter what way you look at it. So then he talks about death by disease and poverty, like the diseases that animals carry, like certain animals, including vampire bats and rats. I think were the top two ones that carried most of the diseases. At least the ones that he was talking about, anyway. And then he kind of goes in through like death by accidents, and that was where the movie got a little weird for me because it was just showing like a whole bunch of different accidents that could happen potentially. And I feel like this is where maybe some of the mockumentary stuff came in, and obviously some of like the practical effects, because I'm not really sure how much of that footage was real near the end of the movie. But then he meets with a man named Joseph Binder, because the one thing he hadn't really touched on yet was like life after death. And I was actually kind of shocked that he would even, dive into like the paranormal side of things, but he did with Joseph, so I have to give him a little bit of kudos for that. As somebody who believes in ghosts myself, I thought that was kind of fascinating and interesting that he would even do that as a doctor. But yeah, I guess he kind of wanted to touch on everything. And then at the end of the movie, there's a birth. So it's kind of like a full cycle, I guess, kind of showing you that, where life starts and we never really know where life is going to end. So yeah, just kind of like live life to the fullest as much as you possibly can. Do all the things that you want to do, and if you can't get something achieved, just remember that is also okay. I don't think in our lifetime, no matter how short or how long it is, that we are going to be able to do everything on a list that we want to do. It's just sometimes it's just not achievable, or sometimes we just don't have the time. So kind of set, I guess, realistic expectations based on where you want your life to go, I suppose, and just kind of take it step by step. And then if some of the things you don't want to do, or if some of the things you want to do don't end up coming to fruition, that's also okay. Like, as humans, I think we are meant to fail just as much as we succeed. So kind of, yeah, I guess that's kind of like my own take on life, I suppose. But yeah, just try your hardest at everything, obviously, because you never know. Like, don't give up on your dreams or anything like that, for sure. But yeah, if you don't reach all of the things you wanted to do in life, that's also okay. Because I think sometimes we set lists that are just so high above our heads sometimes that we're like, oh, that'd be cool to do, but am I ever going to have the time to do it, right? At least that's how I look at it. But, I mean, everybody looks at life differently, right? So, anyhow, 5 out of 10 for this movie, and I guess I will see you guys in the next review. Bye-bye for now.